Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to a brand new episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and I am joined by one of my co-hosts this week, who I haven't had a chance to chat with in quite some time, Scott Drebit. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Heather. It has been a minute or 7 years. I don't know anymore.
Time means nothing anymore, especially at the end of this year. Time is just a myth at this point, I think, is the best way to put it. But it has been a while.
Yes.
So it's nice to get to chat with you, especially for the holidays.
Yes, it is. I am very excited to spend some time with you.
Well, thank you. And I with you. So in the tradition of the holiday spirit.
That's right.
And speaking of holiday spirit, for this week's episode, we are going to be jumping into Louis Jackson's Christmas Evil, which came out in 1980. And also at some point had been known as You Better Watch Out, and also was known as Terror in Toyland. I'm not sure why this movie got so many titles, but it's fascinating and I love that. And I wanted to dive into this one in particular for a few reasons. One, we hadn't talked about it before, so that was good. Two, I actually think it's a really interesting Christmas horror movie that feels very unlike most of the other Christmas horror movies out there, especially the slashers. And I also recently revisited it through the Joe Bob's Christmas special and just found a lot of sort of the backstory fascinating. And I just think it's a really interesting and singular Christmas horror movie in general.
I could not agree with you more. I just watched it this afternoon in preparation for our little chat. And no matter how many times I watch it, I always come at it from find a slightly new angle to approach it from that's just as fascinating. This afternoon when I watched it, I came at it as just as a straight up drama that was punctuated with some brief moments of horror and fantasy, which I'm sure we will get to. So that's kind of the way I came at it when I watched it this time. Is I was fascinated by the drama of our protagonist's mental state throughout the entire film. It coming from that angle. It's really fascinating.
It is. And I think that's what is something, because I only saw this a few years ago for the first time, thanks to, I believe it is the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, and Vinegar Syndrome, of course, has been doing the Dark Lord's work for years. But it was a blind buy for me when it came out. And I was really glad in retrospect to have picked it up because I'd never seen it and was really struck by how different. I think I was expecting, somebody who grew up watching like the Silent Night, Deadly Night movies, or at least the first two. I was expecting a movie that felt more in line with that. And this is very much, if you took away some of the more extreme moments of violence, like this could play as a straight drama and work just as well, which I think is the testament to it being really great storytelling. And there is something really fascinating and sad about the story that's sort of at the center of this. And I guess for those of you who are listening, if you've never seen it, I would probably recommend maybe going and watching it before you listen to this, because we're going to get into some spoilers.
Oh yeah.
Because why were we here otherwise? And the movie's 40 years old, so we've all had some time. So if you don't have the Blu-ray, it is streaming on Shudder right now. So if you are listening and you haven't watched it and you want to sort of preserve that experience, turn us off, go watch Shudder, come back, and then you're all set to go.
Go watch a girl, come back and get the tea.
Yes. So I think it makes sense to kind of like sort of break it down in terms of, if you go on IMDb, like, they give you a pretty neat and tidy sort of synopsis for it, where they lay it out as like a toy factory worker who ends up being mentally scarred as a small child when he realizes Santa isn't real. Basically serves a nervous breakdown after being belittled at work, and then embarks on a Yuletide killing spree. Honestly, I think there's a whole lot more going on than that. For those of you listening, that sort of gives you the brunt of what Christmas Evil is.
Yeah. Yeah, that leaves out just a whole bunch, doesn't it? I mean,
It leaves all the good stuff out.
it leaves all the good stuff out, and it basically gives you, that's only like two plot points. It's a great character study, and it doesn't, I think, and I'm the same way as you. I came to seeing this movie late, and it was always one that I heard about, though, when all the Santa movies were coming out, like you were saying, Silent Night, Deadly Night, etc., etc. And Christmas Evil was one of the, not earliest, but somewhere in the middle of the pack, coming out in 1980. But I hadn't even heard of it until that kind of subgenre took off in the mid 80s, and then the talking point of the movie became, of course, the very last scene, which we will get to, and I won't really go into here because it's a whole topic unto itself. But that kind of became its calling card that I knew it of. And so even seeing that couched with the poster they had, which was the Santa on the roof with an axe, kind of similar to the Silent Night, Deadly Night, it gave you an impression of one kind of movie. And then it starts up, and it's not that at all. There's virtually no horror elements, really, other than the music, which is kind of pushing that mood on you, until later in the film. It really does unfold in a naturalistic way, as opposed to, a bunch of horror tropes popping up in it.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I was a kid who kind of grew up with the whole Silent Night, Deadly Night panic that happened in 84. And I remember it vividly. I remember it being on the news. I thought it was cool. I was like, ooh, killer Santa movie. Cause I was pretty much well into my horror sort of excursions at that age. And I was like, oh, they did a killer Santa movie. So it's interesting to me. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because this didn't have like the release that Silent Night, Deadly Night had, because I don't even know like if it really necessarily came out in theaters here. I know it played in some East Coast like theaters here and there in the winter of 1980, but I don't even know if it had like a big, like if it went to other cities or if it just specifically played the East Coast. So there's obviously somebody out there who's far more adept at being able to answer that. Somebody like Brad Henderson would be like, he would know. He would know. But what I think is interesting is like, so this movie, is essentially like a Santa a guy who wants to become Santa because he feels that he's missing. There's just something missing, and he's, and there's certain things that he's doing that could be arguably seen as very questionable. But his intentions are pure. And I think that's the important part. Because there's early on in the movie, like very early on, like after we sort of have that sort of prologue where, he's a kid who sees his mom and dad groping each other, in the most like sort of mundane gropings ever. Like, and he's just like completely like, oh my God, Santa is my dad. And now everything is ruined. And then like we catch up with Harry, as an adult, and he's like spying on little kids, which like in this day and age, if you see a grown man walking around apartment buildings with binoculars looking into little kids' bedrooms, that in itself is a whole thing. But what's interesting is that this movie doesn't make that the creepy part, because it's all about Harry wanting to make sure that these kids are being good and that they're living up to sort of this mantra that we all, if you're somebody who celebrates Christmas, like you grow up thinking like you have to be good because that's when Santa will bring you stuff. And, for better or for worse, it sort of builds a moral compass in you, because you don't want to screw up because you want Santa to bring you stuff. Which maybe that reward system's a little flawed, but like it worked for me when I was a kid. Because I'll tell you what, pretty much when November 1st hit, I was like the best kid on the planet.
Sure. I think what's interesting is Lewis Jackson, what he does is what you were just mentioning there about what looks like inappropriate behavior, I think that's done intentionally and kind of perversely, in the sense that you're setting your protagonist up with an ugly side, an allegedly ugly side. And then as the movie goes on, and you chip away at him, you start to gain more sympathy for him, even though what happens in the beginning, there's nothing, it's all kind of lightly alluded to. But I think, like I said, I think that was done intentionally, so that to kind of start the protagonist off with a bit of a deficit, so that he would earn our sympathy as the movie went. And I think that tactic worked.
I definitely do too. And I think that's what's really great. It's like at the beginning of the movie, you know, as Harry's getting up and he's doing his routine, I mean, clearly you could see something's off about him. You know, he lives in a very isolated existence where like he's even sort of emotionally distanced himself to a degree from his brother and his brother's family. But also like, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. So like, I'll put it this way. Like, I love Halloween. I get stupid over Christmas. So for me, like, Harry is kind of living my dream in this movie, because like his whole house is just decked out. Like there is just Santa upon Santa, like in every like corner of his apartment.
Yeah.
And there's Christmas decorations and there's dolls and there's toys, you know, and it's a very immersive place for him, where it's where he can go and feel like he is becoming Santa. And there's something really interesting about that, because, you know, we've seen people sort of become Santa just as on a visual level to go and do bad things, where he really, you know, for better or for worse, he really wants to be Santa because of good reasons, because he wants to sort of embody what that character means to so many people. Yeah. But I think that's what I sort of think is interesting, even at the beginning of the movie. Like, I get that. I get Harry in those moments, because I get that way. Like once November 1st hits, like I'm in Christmas mode, baby. And I'm just like, you know, my tree was up by like the 4th or 5th this year. And it was just because I had to take time to pack up all my Halloween stuff that had already been up for 2 months. So I don't want to just sound like I threw away Halloween for Christmas, but I had my Halloween stuff up for 2 months. I was like, okay, I can do my Christmas stuff for 2 months. There's no rules this year. So, you know, and if people want to keep their Christmas trees up till June this year or in 2021, God bless you, go for it. I don't even care. Like I don't know. I'm not even sure yet. I don't even know. I don't have any plans on what I'm taking my Christmas stuff down.
It's a free for all, man. I'm getting closer to Big Lebowski every day. You know,
just let people live their lives, man.
Yeah.
You know? So
and fuck the Eagles.
Always. But yeah, so there's a part of me that like really, I think that's what sort of endears Harry to me at the beginning, even though by so many other people and by society standards, he's very much a weirdo. He's very aloof. He's very socially like awkward. He's not the guy you go and hang out with and have a beer with, obviously. You know, as we sort of learn later on in the movie. And it's just, it to me, like, yeah, it's pretty questionable peeking in on kids in their bedrooms. Like, you know, that's not something I would do. And even in 1980 or even during the 80s, it probably shouldn't be doing it. But I think it's important that the intention is there, because like I love the fact that he does that, and then he goes back to his apartment and he pulls out the 2 books, The Good Boys and Girls and The Bad Boys and Girls.
Yeah.
And I always remember like thinking to myself, well, how on earth like would Santa even keep lists like that? Because, you know, in my mind, like when I was a little kid, like I just thought, well, there's thousands of kids out there. Like I couldn't even imagine millions of kids. But I love the fact that like this isn't just something he does in December, because you can see from the pages, like he has like a running tab on all these kids. Sure. And it's like, that's devotion that I don't even really know of. Like, I don't know that I'm that devoted to anything in my life. I mean, maybe like this job, but you know, but yeah,
it's the psychology of Harry that I find fascinating. And when I was watching it today, because when you've seen something a certain amount of times, questions pop in your head about maybe one aspect of it or whatever. And so I'm watching it, and Santa and Mrs. Claus are, as you said, rather mundanely getting down to some business beside the soap cart. Do I have that right?
I think so. Like but then there was like bread there.
There was toast. And was that soap or was that butter? I don't know.
Like he washed up and then he ate like a piece of bread that he put something on, and it's like, is it butter? Is it
put some soap on it and then drank some milk?
I guess in the 40s they didn't bake cookies for kids or for Santa. Like, I don't. It's a very odd sequence, but yet I kind of love it.
But sorry, that was the tangent. So the psychology. So Harry sees Santa and his mom going to town. He gets upset. Now, is Harry upset because he realizes that Santa is actually his dad and not the real Santa, and that illusion is destroyed? Or is he upset because Santa Claus, he's mad at Santa Claus because Santa Claus is hitting on his mom? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I kind of take that moment to him sort of having that mental break of like, because we all had that moment as kids, like, spoiler alert, guys, Santa's not real. Santa lives in our hearts, but he's not real. And for me, it sort of represents that moment where we all have that sort of psychological break with the entity of Santa during our childhoods, whether it's like when you find out he's not real, or you just start to put the math together and you realize, well, this is kind of completely impossible. And you realize, oh yeah, there's no way this guy exists.
So then why does he want to be him? That's the part that I'm struggling with.
I think because he realizes, like, there's an idyllic thing. There's an ideal of Santa that I think he really glommed onto. He's
bringing it back.
And he wants to be that.
He's going to bring it back.
Yeah.
He's going to bring Santa back, like sexy. Right.
Yeah,
I got
like
it.
Sexy. Okay. Not sexy Santa, but he's doing it. And
I'm bringing Santa back. Yep.
I mean, I remember being pretty bummed out when I realized there's no Santa. It was one of my friends told me. And then I remember, like, that year watching my mom pull stuff out of the closet. And I was like, oh, okay. And it's just, I think for me, like, I've always, because when I was a kid, like, I grew up in a pretty meager existence. Like, we lived in a trailer park. It's like some Christmases my mom had to work 3 jobs just to have stuff under the tree, which always made me really appreciate, the holidays, not because of the gifts, but because she went through so much to try to do the best for me. And I think even in the years when we didn't have anything, like, there were years where we didn't have Christmas presents, and there was years we didn't even have heat because we couldn't afford propane for our trailer, but I still believed in the magic of Christmas. And I think that there's something really nice about the way that Harry, in a lot of ways, even though that the facade is broken for him, he's gone through to the other side, but yet he still believes in the magic of that holiday and what this character can represent and what it is. And it's like, and I'm not a particularly religious person, but I actually believe in the magic of something like Christmas and goodwill and cheer that I would about, like, having to go to church, which is kind of weird. Sure. But I do believe in the idea of, like, goodwill and, towards humanity, trying to be there for people and things like that. And I think for me, that's what the holidays always represent. Like, we always say, like, oh, you should be doing this all year. And I think we try. And I think especially this year, a lot of us tried because a lot of us were struggling. But I think that there's also something that really feels it's the time of year where you put in a little extra effort, because for some people, it's a really good time of year. And for a lot of people, it isn't. And the fact that Harry, even though he's had that broken and he's had that mental break inside, and you can tell because of just, he sleeps in Santa clothing. He likes to make little Santa beards when he shaves in the morning, as do I. But like, ultimately what drives him is being good to the kids. Like, what triggers him at work is the fact that they're trying to, like, sort of cut corners when it comes to raising money or finding toys to donate to kids in a hospital. And it, like, the fact that his coworkers are just trying to find the best way to sort of cheat the system to do that, like, that pisses him off. So ultimately, I like Harry because even though maybe his methods are questionable, and his psyche is obviously fragile, like, there's really a lot of good in him. And for me, that's why he stands out, like, as opposed to something like Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is also, people don't really talk enough about the fact that that very much has a lot of psychological elements too, but a very different sort of traumatic way.
Be a good old grandpa. Yeah.
Yeah. It actually, if I was smarter and we had time to plan this, we should have done sort of the psychological back and forth about killer Santas. Because I think there's a lot of sort of land or sort of area to traverse with those discussions, because if you look at them, you know, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum. Like, you have Harry, who wants to go out there and do good. And then you have, like, Silent Night, Deadly Night, where, like, he just wants to kill people and punish and everybody's naughty. So it's interesting. And I think that, you know, again, I think it's for me, like, when I think about, like, wanting to, like, incite these sort of, like, you know, sensationalism and things like that, I think, especially in the case of Christmas Evil, I think it was almost sort of inherently trying to show this character who wants to do good in this world and just keeps getting pushed further and further away from that to the point where he breaks. And I think that to me is why, you know, I really, really like this movie a lot, because it celebrates everything that we should love about the holidays, but ultimately also shows us that the worst of humanity can really break all of us.
Yeah, you know, I think it really feels, in all honesty, like it plays like a Martin Scorsese movie, in the sense that you really have an anti-hero, because he does kill, not children, but he does kill. He does end up murdering. But as you said, he's a man who's struggling with his own psyche, and he's trying to do good, and his intentions are nothing but good. But, you know, when enough people don't behave up to Santa's standards, then, you know, he needs to take care of business.
Yeah. And I love the fact that even amidst, like, once he kind of goes into this sort of trajectory of violence, he's still looking out for kids. Like, there's a scene where, like, at this point, like, everything is just sort of falling apart. Like, even his facade is, like, very disheveled, and just, you can see the cracks in him, and they're starting to sort of, this, you know, the sadness is starting to seep out, and this desperation and this frustration, especially in the, like, the scene towards the end where, like, you know, he gets confronted by his parents, and they're like, the guy's like, I know it's you, and he pulls a knife, and yet he still really wants, you know, I know part of it is protecting because the kids come around him, but he's still giving them gifts. Like everything is going wrong for him, but in those moments, he's still giving out presents and trying to be a good Santa. And, like, for me, like, if I'm at the point where I'm like, the jig is up, like, things are definitely going downhill, and it's only a matter of time at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know that my first priority would be making sure that the girls and boys have got their, you know, toy soldiers and their robots and their dump trucks. But he does, you know, even though the kids are protecting him, he's still like, I need to be giving to them, which is pretty rare, really, if you think about it, for a quote unquote killer Santa. There's
a line of dialogue, and it was something that I just noticed for the first time today, that that Harry uses throughout the film, and it's he can play the tune.
Yes.
Or he's learning the notes so that he can play the tune. And I just found that so interesting, because it's so rare to find a character who has a moment of self-realization, but then it becomes tragic because he can't do anything about that self-realization. His destiny is kind of, you know, already planned out ahead of him.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting too, because I want to bring up, obviously his brother, who's played by Jeffrey DeMunn, which most people will know from a lot of Frank Darabont productions, and of course, The Walking Dead. I think this is a really interesting role because one, it just doesn't you can tell it's Jeffrey DeMunn when you look at him, like it's a very young Jeffrey DeMunn, but also he's such a dick in this movie.
He is, isn't he?
He's a really terrible younger brother. He says, I wanted to have I was excited to have an older brother, so I had somebody to look up to. And he's like, and look at my, my total basket case of a brother. And I'm like, well, now you're be a little more compassionate. And you have to wonder how much of that sort of lack of emotional connectedness that Harry obviously doesn't have to Phil, makes you wonder, at what point, did this all really start to kind of come apart for him? Because it's great because he's still, Harry still cares about Phil's kids, and if you could tell Phil's kids still really care about him because even towards the end of the movie, they're like, Dad, no. And they're trying to stop their own father from doing harm to this guy who's just killed people. Yeah. Basically. But I think there's a lot to be said for the idea of compassion, because the lack of compassion that Harry is confronted with consistently in this movie really is his undoing. And I get it. I mean, I think especially this year when I think compassion can go so far for so many, and the fact that so many people can't even react to people with compassion is really telling. And I think if nothing, there's a lot, even though this movie is 40 years old, there's a lot about this movie that really feels timely now. I hate using the word timely. That feels so cheesy timely? At this point. Yeah, because everything feels timely. We're in a weird time where everything feels like it's of this time. But I think there's something to be said about a movie that's just inherently wants people to be good to each other. And when they aren't, it causes this person to go down this really dark path. With sort of tragic consequences.
Yeah, I think it's very important what Lewis Jackson does here is he doesn't look down at Harry. We see that Harry is basically a decent person. The lack of social skills are there. But he just wants to do good when it comes to children anyway. He's stuck at that emotional state of connectivity with children, I think, beyond a Santa Claus little child connection, which I think is also interesting psychologically. If you look at it from that way, there's so much about the mind and I think the heart to this movie that kind of sets it apart. That sets it apart from a slasher or a supernatural thriller, etc. It's a drama with some, I don't know, fantasy elements to it.
Yes, and when the dragons come in, no, I'm just sorry. Because when you say fantasy, just dragons. That's
sure, of course.
Because I'm an idiot. But yeah, no, I think I think for me too, it's I love Christmas horror movies. I really do. But I will admit, once I get to sort of the week before Christmas, I sort of focus in on the more traditional Christmas movies. The only exception I think being Black Christmas, which is the weird thing for me, because even though that movie is really visceral and pretty mean spirited but there's just something really reassuring about it. I can't even explain it. I think it's the music, the tone, the cinematography, everything. I find it very soothing. But it's, a lot of the other Christmas horror movies, I kind of venture away from. I don't I'll watch Silent Night, Deadly Night once in December and then I'm good. Yeah. Krampus, I kind of watch a little bit closer to the holiday. And Gremlins 2, because Gremlins, not Gremlins 2, but Gremlins Comic 2. Just because that was something I saw in theaters and I grew up with and became a staple of all my Christmases and stuff like that. But this I could actually this is something I would definitely sort of incorporate closer to the holiday, and wouldn't feel weird about it, because ultimately, even though it is, a horror movie all wrapped up with these, with this fun holiday, feelings and dressings and things like that, it really is like this beautiful sort of celebration of the holidays and the spirit and of Christmas and things like that in a very unconventional way. And I almost feel like it was just too pure for this world to come out in 1980, because it's interesting. I saw like on some of the promotional stuff that they did for it, like, this was sort of marketed in the same way of like Halloween and Friday the 13th. To me, this movie doesn't feel like either one of those.
Oh no.
But that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing.
But impossible to market.
Yes. By the way, there's Thunderdome happening outside of my office right now with the dogs. So if you hear that, that's what that is.
That makes you Tina Turner then.
It does. It does. Bata Town. One man enters, one man leaves. But yeah, and I think there's something really lovely about this movie. I think it's actually shot really well too, I think, in a way that feels like, I feel like I'm in a blustery Christmas night. And I don't get many of those these days living on the West Coast. There's just something really inherently sweet about this movie, even though it takes a very sinister turn. And I just like the fact that up until then, like, Harry is just Harry. And there's never a point where, like, I feel like he's crossed the line to being too far. And I can't believe I'm saying about a guy who kills people. But, like, you know what? Most of these people had it coming. Like, if you're coming out of midnight mass and you start laughing at Santa, like, did you not just miss the point of that midnight mass service you were sitting in on, if you believe that stuff? Like, talk about like a guy who had it coming.
I mean, maybe not exactly what I would call equitable in terms of the crime versus punishment, but I'm there with you. Don't worry.
I mean, like, hey, look, he first only took the guy's eye out, but then they had to keep pushing. So I'm just saying, maybe if you're going to go to church and be a church person, maybe you should take some of those lessons to heart and not be a jerk to Santa as he stands outside of a church on Christmas Eve of all nights. So, if it was November 15th, all right, I'll let it slide. It's Christmas Eve. Like, come on. So this is the point in my life where I'm going to turn into Mrs. Claus, and then I'm just going to totally become Mrs. Claus. And then you're eventually going to read about me on the news because I went crazy one Christmas in like 5 years and like,
oh no,
trying to do right things. So this is my.
Were you making flesh cookies?
I don't know if I'll go that far. I don't know if I'll go Black Christmas 2006 far, but
no.
Yeah, I don't think I'll go that far.
Please don't.
But no. But you mentioned the ending, which I kind of love because it's one of those where, like, visually it's something. That visual of the van with the sleigh on it, kind of going through the air and the moon, and I sort of love the moment because one, it's like sort of this Thelma and Louise moment where you ultimately kind of know what the outcome of it is, but it's never like specifically spelled out for you. But you're pretty much sure Harry's done. But we don't really know.
I first saw the very ending when I was about 15. I was flipping through the TV channels one night, and just that last 30 seconds comes on, and where the van goes over, and then it starts flying towards the moon. And then the film was over, and I turned to myself and I said, "Self, what the F was that?" And then nothing, because I don't think it was ever, it may have been covered in Fangoria. I'm not sure, but I had never heard of it, or I didn't know what I had just seen with the van flying through the car. It really wasn't until so many years later when I think when they really started doing the reevaluation of all those Santa movies, because by that point there had been a lot, and that one stood out for people because of that ending. Everyone always remembers the ending of the movie, and that's kind of, I guess, how I came to it too, was I had seen the ending first, and then saw the rest of the movie that gets you to that ending. And I think the way it plays is absolutely brilliant because it ends the film on such a fantastical note that plays, I think, great off of everything that came before it. It was kind of this build up, and then they give Harry the send off that he wants, with him actually becoming Santa Claus, or in his mind becoming Santa Claus. I just think it's perfect visually. It's perfect for what it's saying. It's just perfect.
It really is. And I do love that it doesn't spell it out for you, that it does sort of fit the idea of what Santa is. Like, he's this entity that somehow can exist and deliver presents. And there's something very magical and fantastical about him. And I think in a lot of ways, like, did you watch any of the Amazon Blumhouse movies this year?
I have not seen any of them yet. No.
Okay. So there's one in particular that, like, the girl is basically thinking like she's living in this big moment. And I'm not being too specific because I don't want to ruin anything, but like, and ultimately it's not the scenario that is all, that's really happening in reality. And I love when movies can sort of splinter sort of what somebody's psyche is telling them is happening. And they're sort of they get their happy ending, but ultimately the reality is probably something very different. And I think that fits for Harry. I love the fact that they we start hearing The Night Before Christmas as this is happening too, because I think it's perfect. And I think it ties in really well to who Harry is and what he represents, and sort of in his mind, what he's become ultimately, because now he's Santa flying with his sleigh. Mm-hmm. Like, he has become Santa and he has achieved his goal. Like, he's there now. So whether he dies or he doesn't, it isn't really important to the story. Ultimately, I almost think like it would have been cool to sort of see him come back, a few years later, like he somehow survives, and
it's totally a sequel.
Yeah. Like if we could put together 40 years later, because now he's like, although I'm sure, I don't know how old the actor is that played him, Brandon Maggart. He is 87.
Let's go, Brandon.
Yes. Dude, okay, so I just looked up Brandon online. Brandon has 7 children.
One of them's Fiona Apple.
I just realized that. So that to me is incredibly fascinating. Yeah. Like, how freaking cool. Like, okay, you're already Fiona Apple, so you're pretty awesome as it is.
Yeah.
But like, your dad played this crazy cool Santa. Yeah, I guess I just never really knew much about his personal life or anything like that. But that's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Like, do you think he dressed up as Santa for his kids? I have questions now. I need to know these things. I'm sure it's probably on the Christmas Evil Blu-ray, and I should have watched the special features again.
She's not over 40, is she?
Fiona?
How old would Fiona Apple be?
She is a year older than me. So she is 43
She's 28.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Scott, too much. Right? Well, was that my Christmas present?
Hey, you know it, girl.
Oh, thank you.
You got that exchange rate.
Yes, I love it. It's a Canadian to US rate. Yeah, she was born in 1977.
Okay.
So
I don't know if he would show them. I don't even know if he would show them that movie.
But I'm wondering, like, after he made this movie, do you think like he went and dressed up for his kids as like Santa? Like, or was he like, I think I'm done with this character? Maybe I'm just curious.
Scarred.
Now I need to know. I have questions.
Maybe
I think honestly,
get the beard off.
I know. Like, maybe like if I ever got to interview Fiona Apple, sure, I'd ask her about all of her amazing music, but I'd be like, did your dad dress up as Santa? That would be how I would lead it.
Yeah.
That's Fiona, what I need to know.
Fiona, we're going to sandwich this interview with the bread is going to be Christmas Evil questions.
Yes. And yeah, speaking of bread, we'll give you a little platter. You can slap some butter on it or whatever it is. I don't know. But yeah, that's some really fascinating trivia right there. Interesting.
It is. Damon is really cut in this movie too.
He is. He's kind of it's funny because he still looks a little older in it, even though he was only like, well, it's interesting because he was actually born the year that the movie takes place in at the prologue. So he was born in 47. So, so he's playing a few years older than he was when he made this movie. But so he was like 32, I think that's when they made this movie, but he's still kind of foxy, but he still looks a little bit older. I don't know if it's the hair.
It's the hair.
But yeah, but he could definitely still kick my ass from this movie. Totally. So yeah, I wish he'd been a better, like not like a better character, because it's a good like it's a well conceived character.
Yeah.
But I just wish, I wish he would have been
a little more supportive, right?
Yeah.
I think I think there may have been more to that, possibly. Maybe possibly it was cut, or I don't know. It seems like a pretty tight movie script wise. I think it just wasn't brought to the forefront, maybe.
Yeah. And I think also too, I think one of the reasons that this movie first started to kind of hit my radar was years ago. I think I read an interview from John Waters, who talked about this being one of the best like Christmas movies ever. And I don't even think he specifically said Christmas horror movies. I think he said Christmas movies.
Yeah.
And that's me. I was like, oh, interesting. Because I love when you don't even have to specify genre, like in terms of like whether it's horror, suspense, comedy. Like it's not, he didn't say it's Christmas comedies or anything. He said Christmas movie. Yeah. And I think that's when I first I was like, oh, I really should watch this movie. And I think at that point, like it was hard to find, and and then Vinegar Syndrome came in and saved the day. Gosh, was that 6 years ago already? It was that they put this out.
I mean, it could be a Hallmark movie if
took out the eye gouging and the axing, and
if the log line is a man who loves a Christmas more than anything is desperate to become Santa Claus and give gifts to all the children.
Yeah, I think if you trim a little of the violence out, I think this could play like I could definitely see it being part of Hallmark's, they do like 2 months of Christmas movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then they run it for a whole month in July too. Like they know what they're doing over there. People talk like they'll make fun of Hallmark, but they know what they're doing because their viewership is like crazy through the holidays. So they know what they're doing.
If they remade this movie, I would make sure that Candace Cameron Bure got mowed down in some manner.
Who I would love to see sort of be in this is because I watch a lot of the food shows, like on Food Network, like the competition shows.
Yeah.
And I know he does Hallmark movies too. Jonathan Bennett, who was in Mean Girls.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Guy Fieri, but
oh no, let's not talk bad about Guy Fieri. He's
great. No, but I'm just saying I couldn't see him in a movie.
But why have we not had a Guy Fieri Christmas special yet is my question.
That's a very good question.
I mean, the guy pretty much was Santa this year. Yep. So I feel like that should be a thing. So we're putting that out there. So when that happens, right. I want my 5%. You send me my check over here in the Valley. It's cool. I actually live really close to the Hallmark offices. I could go pick it up. It's cool. Hallmark, if you're listening, I can consult.
Make it out to send it to the Hallmark office building, care of the Valley.
Yes, care of the Valley.
It should get there.
Yes. I was trying to think of because one, I would love, I'm not somebody who's super precious over movies. So if people want to remake them at this point, that's fine. Just as long as they've never remade Point Break, I'm totally cool.
Never happened.
No, it didn't, which is good. I can still sleep at night over that.
Yeah.
But I was trying to think of who I would cast as Harry this time.
Paul Giamatti.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. You could also do Zach Galifianakis.
I just feel like he might lean a little too comedic, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know he's done some straight stuff where it hasn't been necessarily comedy. So you could kind of I don't know. I like Giamatti a lot for that, though.
Yeah.
Either way, I would love to actually remake this movie because I feel like my over tendencies to getting my own compulsions at Christmas time would feed really well into this. And I think, setting it in a modern setting and sort of where we are these days. And I think there's a lot to sort of explore there.
Got one more.
Oh.
Remember the TV show Happy Endings?
Yes.
The gay character on the show.
Oh my gosh, I don't remember who that was. Oh,
he's in the new Creep Show Christmas special. He stars in it. That's premiering tomorrow.
I have not watched it yet.
Anyway, do you know which guy I mean?
I can see his face. I can see his face, and I don't know why I can't think.
I'm gonna think of it. I'm gonna not look at my phone at all and just go through my amazing memory and find out his name, because he would be. Is it? I'm just perfect.
Found Adam Paley.
Yes, thank you.
There you go. All right.
He would be fantastic.
You know who I also think would be interesting? Michael Gross.
Now that for Harry?
Yeah, because he's he's a little bit older now. But and he's played Santa for Hallmark already. So he's already got a foot in the door. But I think he's a guy who can take a character who looks on the surface to sort of be one note and can sort of find that. I think that's just like my Tremors fandom talking.
No, he's great. He's fantastic.
But I think that there's something that or maybe like 20 years ago.
Do you not think he's Phil though? What if we put him as Phil?
Oh, that's so against type, but I kind of love it.
Yeah.
But then you have to make him the older brother, I think.
Yeah, you can switch that around.
Yeah, we can switch that. No big deal.
Yeah,
no big deal. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's for me, like if somebody out there wants to remake Christmas Evil, hit me up. I've got ideas. I could do this. But yeah, I think there's something really interesting about where this falls within the spectrum of Christmas horror. And for me, it sort of feels like it would more so than like, the obvious would be like, oh, pair it with Silent Night, Deadly Night, or, Dial Code Santa Claus. But like for me, I actually think I would pair it more with Krampus, which is sort of a cautionary tale about being good towards other people, because you might reap the repercussions of not sort of doing what you're supposed to be doing during the holidays.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I don't know what I would pair it with. Would I want to pair it with something that brings out or complements as you were saying, the inherent goodness in the movie? Or do I want to pair it up with something that has a strong revenge motive in it? I'm not sure. I think I would go with something with the former that would highlight and complement the sweetness, basically, of this movie. So what I would do is I would show a Christmas Story, and then I would show Christmas Evil.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't even really have to sort of pair it with a horror. With a horror. With a horror. Yeah, I think you could go the traditional route. Maybe Scrooged even.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What if we could get Bill Murray to be Harry?
With Michael Gross as his brother.
I love it. It's like all of my 80s dreams are coming true in one place.
This is the full 80s bingo card right here.
Yeah, right? Like, let's just check it all off. I'm trying to think of like, who else I could throw in there. Is Punky Brewster available? Where is Soleil Moon Frye? Who could she play?
Well, I think no one would believe that she's Michael Gross's daughter.
No, but she could be
his granddaughter.
We could work in a different story, like, maybe Harry has an ex-wife that just couldn't deal with his psychoses, and, we're giving away all of our golden ideas right now, by the way. So somebody's going to make this movie next year and we're going to be pissed.
Someone's scribbling this down right now.
Yeah. Cause obviously we are doing really good things right now. We're just spitballing all this amazing content.
It's the section of the show we call elevator pitch.
At least it's not elevated pitch because we
No.
don't care about the elevated horrors.
I'm not pitching A24.
Or maybe we are.
Or we are. Call us.
Yeah, who knows? We're open to anything at this point. Like,
Yeah.
you know, our gate swings every way. That's not at this point.
That's right.
So, you know, we're fine. I'm covering anything like that doesn't even remotely resemble
That's right.
horror. Who cares?
Asylum, I got you, baby. Let's go.
Yeah, I actually have a friend who writes for them. So, you know, that was who I was supposed to do this week's episode with. So, but I'll catch up with him in a few weeks. But yeah, so like we're doing it all. We're doing it all up. All bets are off 2021. So, all right. So I guess we could wrap up. So Scott, have you been a good boy this year?
I have no choice.
I mean, yeah, we've all been home. Like we can't go out there and be doing bad things, really.
Yeah. I mean, I can only apologize for self-immolation so many times, you know, before it becomes passé. So other than that, I'm golden. All
right. Well, that means that Harry's going to come visit you and bring you good toys then.
Yay.
Yes. So I feel like I've been pretty good. I mean, I did wreck our car in February, so that's some points off the good list, but I kind of made up for it. So I'll give myself something of a pass, I think.
All right.
So I've been okay. So, you know,
I think you've been good.
So maybe not. Maybe I won't get coal, but maybe I just don't get the big present this year. No bike under the tree for me this year. So did you feel like, you know, because I think for all of us, like maybe we've been sort of struggling a little bit this year, you know, in terms of kind of keeping our spirits up, whether it's the Christmas spirit or just spirits in general. Do you feel like this sort of restored your faith in humanity a little bit, or do you feel like it exacerbated certain aspects of the bad elements out there?
You know, I think, and you alluded to this a little earlier, it is a movie that you don't necessarily have to watch during the holidays because the intention, as you said, compassion is really the goal of the movie. So I think anytime you watch it, that feeling comes across and you can never get enough of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, maybe to my own detriment, sometimes I've been sort of a little too much when it comes to like certain things, which I've sort of had to kind of dial back a little bit. But I think, you know, ultimately, like, I think we've all like been sort of dealt rough hands in our lives to a certain extent. You know, maybe our experiences aren't all exactly the same, but we've all had our sort of crosses to bear. And I think if anything, this year has really taught us that just being nice, even just a little bit, can go a long way for somebody. It can make all the difference in the world. And, you know, I guess my message would be to anybody who's listening to this, if you're listening at this point, who knows, maybe you've checked out. But like, you know, if you're going on social media somewhere and you see somebody struggling, just send them a little message, just something nice. Just go out of your way once a day just to do something nice for somebody. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture, you know, but just a compliment can go a long way. Just a, hey, you can do it. You know, I've personally had a really rough year beyond the pandemic. And there were so many people, gosh, I'm going to get emotional, who really stepped up for us and made some really difficult decisions, not decisions, but a lot of difficult situations, a little less difficult. And it really sort of made me believe in the good in this world, despite everything else that the world tells you and all these terrible things that are going on and a lot of the hate that's out there. I think if nothing else, I think my faith in the goodness of other people was restored this year in a lot of ways. And we still have a lot of work to do out there. You know, nothing's fixed, nothing's changed. But I just think a little good goes a long way. So that's my schmaltzy message to anybody listening. It's just, you know, if you're out there and you see somebody, even if they don't, you know, just go out there and just be a little bit of Harry out, you know, for the next week or two, and maybe try to carry it into 2021. It's so easy to be snippy. It's so easy to be sarcastic. I know it. Believe me, I've done it too. But I'm working on it. I think we're all a work in progress. And I think there's just something to be said about just trying to throw a little kindness out there in the world, because I think it matters.
I think that was beautifully said, and I would echo your sentiments exactly, except for if you are going to be like Harry, maybe leave out the whole midnight mass.
Don't go poking eyes out. Let's just, no hatchets, no poking eyes out.
Don't go chasing waterfalls and don't go poking out ice.
Yes, it's if there's any words to live by, that should be a shirt.
That should.
We'll have a shirt designer get on that real quick.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's sort of a nice little schmaltzy message to end on.
It's not schmaltzy at all. It's, you know what, in a year when, as you said, we've all been through the shit, being able to connect with people through this podcast, through technology, through social media, has kept a lot of people, people's heads above water. And I think that's something that we should all take pride in, is that we've all been there for each other. And it does make a difference.
Yeah, I think so too. I guess
now you got me going here.
Oh my God, now we're going to start crying. Oh gosh. I think that's a good note for us to sort of leave on. But for those of you listening, we've really appreciated all the support throughout all the years, but especially this year. Thank you for listening to Corpse Club and being with us, throughout these last few weeks or last months, weeks, days, hours, who knows at this point. But we aren't running an episode on Christmas because Lord knows everybody's got better things to be doing on Christmas Day than listening to us. So this will be sort of our last episode for the holidays and for the year, or for December, because I don't know if we're gonna post.
Is that a month?
I don't know. Like, I'm just like,
who cares,
who's
man?
Who's gonna be listening to podcasts on Christmas and New Year's Day? Like, I mean, maybe if you're hungover, but you don't need to listen to me on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say thank you guys for listening to us for all these years, but especially this year. It's been a really nice journey with everybody. We really do appreciate the support, and if you want to read any of our words, I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but they're words. Nonetheless, you can head over to dailydead.com to find out more about Corpse Club. You can go over to corpseclub.com and make sure you follow us over at Daily Dead News at Twitter and at Corpse Club at Twitter as well. And thank you, Scott, for taking time today. I'm really glad that we were able to do this.
It was more than a pleasure. It's been way too long.
It has. So let's do this before next Christmas.
I would hope so.
Yes, let's try. So, and for all of you out there, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah for whatever you celebrate. We just wish you the very best. It's been a really tough year. Let's hopefully try to get through the next few weeks on a high note and get to better times in 2021. And until next time, everybody, stay merry.